So now we're going to be looking at how we can create our books class using base models. The base models actually come from something called pydantics. And what exactly is pydantics? So pydantics is a Python library for data modeling parsing that has efficient error handling and custom validation mechanisms. Pydantic helps us with data validation, settings management using Python's type annotations. And as you looked in the overview section of this project 2.0, I was showing you a screenshot, and as you saw in the class variables, we had things like ID, title, author, description, rating, right? And right beside those things, I had those types. So like ID will be of type of UUID, title will be of type string, author will be of type string. So things like that. So those type annotation things were coming from base models. Base models is part of pydantic. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to import the base model. So from pydantic import base model. So this base model is actually a class inside this pydantic package. And another thing that I'm going to import is UUID. And I'm going to just show you what that is in just a second. Import UUID. So what exactly is UUID? So UUID is a universal unique identifier that has a 128-bit label used for information computer systems. So in a simple language, that means it just gives us a way of uniquely identifying an item. So for example, if you have different records in your database, you have something called primary key, which kind of helps us in uniquely identifying each and every single row. Okay. And how do we identify those rows? Usually we do that using primary keys. In this case, our unique primary key is UUID. Okay. And that's what we're going to be using for IDs. So now let's create our books class here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to create that here. So class book, and this is going to be inheriting from the base model class. And inside this, we will have ID, as I mentioned, which is going to be of type UUID. I'm going to have title, which is going to be of type string. I'm going to have author, which is going to be of type string as well. Description, which is going to be an optional, and we're going to see how we can make that optional in just a second. But for now, it's going to be string. And the last thing we're going to have is rating, which is going to be a rating from 1 to 100, and it's going to be of type integer. So yeah, that's pretty much it as far as creating our class, our book class is concerned using base models. And just to give you a quick recap of what exactly is a base model, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to my browser here, and I'm going to go to this pydantic page, and we're going to look at what a base model is. So models. The primary means of defining objects in pydantics is via models. Okay. Models are simply classes which inherit from base model. So what's going on here? Models are simply classes which inherit from base model. In our case, we are inheriting from base model, and we are creating this book class. So you can call this a book class, or you can also call this a book model, one and the same thing. So in pydantic world, they call it model. Okay. So you can think of models as similar to types in strictly typed language. You don't need to know that. Pydantics is primarily a parsing library, as we looked at. And now just an example. Just like our books class, they are making a user class here from pydantic import base model, and they are creating a class user. They are inheriting from base model. They have two variables here, ID and name. ID is of type integer, as you can see, and this is called type annotation here when you're using a colon and specifying a type. So yeah, so type annotation of integer, and you have another variable name, and they have given a default value of J and O. So whenever you give a default value, that field or that variable becomes optional. So as you can see, user here is a model with two fields, ID, which is an integer and is required, and name, which is a string and is not required, meaning it's optional since it has a default value. And again, you made this class here, and if you know something about Python, you can create an object using that class by supplying user, name of the class, and the field that's required, right? So ID equals 123. Since the name is optional, you don't have to supply that. So yeah, so that's just a a quick overview of what BaseModel is just a class that comes from pydantic, and we inherit that class by creating our own custom class. Like in our case, in books project, it's the class book, and it's a child of this class here, and then we have our variables here, and that's it.